Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books down off the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we've got Tony Pasculi.
Pleasure to be here as always.
Looking forward to it. And this week we've got one of my childhood favorites, and probably I'm imagining one of your favorites as well.
Absolutely.
The Princess Bride by William Goldman.
Yeah, or by S. Morgenstern, as abridged by William Goldman, as we were saying before we started. Yeah. And actually by William Goldman. So the standard question, why? Actually, no. Before I get to that, how did you first encounter this book?
I think, and I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, like the majority of the people that have read the book, my first encounter was, in fact, with the movie.
This is going to be interesting.
Because, and the movie was just delightful and charming, and Fred Savage and Peter Falk,
yeah.
It was just a fantastic film and a feel-good film and a delighted, lighthearted romp. And when I found out there was a book, well, nothing would do but that I go read the book.
And what was your experience of the book having encountered the movie first? Because I went the other way around.
It's been a long time. I would dare say there was some confusion involved. Actually, I think that I vaguely remember having a conversation with somebody about the time, somebody that was familiar with the book. And I was actually uncertain as to whether Goldman actually created the book or if he did what he claimed to have done and abridged, another work. Almost everything that's in the movie is actually in the book.
Almost everything, yes. I was paying attention to that.
There's an awful lot of things that are in the book that are nowhere near the movie. So it's a very different experience.
It is a very different experience. I think the movie actually does a really good job of sort of trimming the book down to its essentials, making the frame story work much more effectively than it does in the book, and sort of punching up some of the stuff so it's just even more quotable, the movie is, than the book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the movie succeeds in doing what Goldman fictitiously claimed he was trying to do.
Yeah.
Get it down to the good parts. I think the movie did a really good job of that.
Yes. All right. So I didn't go back and look up when the movie came out. When did the movie come out?
Honestly, don't remember.
Okay. Well, we can look that up later. I encountered the book first. In fact, I don't remember. I think my sister found it. My youngest sister found it and told me about it, or may have gone the other way around. And I loved this book because it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was a fairy tale, so you got all that fun fairy tale business, but it had all that meta stuff around it, which sort of grounded the fairy tale in the real world a little bit. And it was just bizarre. And when you met someone who had read The Princess Bride, you knew you had met someone who was of a similar ilk. Yeah. And then the movie came out, and then of course it became everybody's story. And so that became less special. But then the movie was initially a tremendous disappointment to me, having encountered the book first. I loved Mandy Patinkin. I loved Andre the Giant and Wallace Shawn, but I was not a fan of Carrie Elwes and Robin Wright. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So it's just like, that's Buttercup? I don't know. That's Westley? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, I suppose since I had seen the movie first, right, they shaped, so as I'm reading it, those are the characters that I envision.
Yeah.
I wasn't burdened by my own imagination coming up with something different. It was ready-made for me.
But now it's been so long that I literally can't read the book without seeing the movie in my mind.
Yeah.
It's just, they're entwined. Yeah, so that's less of a problem now. I love the movie. The movie's amazing. It's a great movie. It grew on me eventually. It is a great, great movie, but it's also a great book. But I think in some ways the movie is better than the book, which is a rare thing.
I think they just serve very different purposes. Yeah.
Well, okay, we need to talk about the frame story because the frame story in the book is not great. Or do you disagree?
Well, it had been so long. I had forgotten so much of this. And the copy that I read this time through was the 30th anniversary edition. And I think the last time that I had this, it was actually pre-25th anniversry. So it was whatever maybe not the original printing, but it didn't have any of the additional thing. It didn't have a lengthy foreword, which he wrote for the 25th, or the additional lengthy foreword that he added on for the 30th. Well, not so lengthy that he added on for the 30th. It didn't have the the trailer for Buttercup's Baby.
Yep.
It didn't have the excerpt from the missing scene leading to the fire swamp. It was a much trimmer book, and my recollection of that is enjoying it much more. It got this 30th anniversary edition got too meta for me.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point you really just want to say, Will, give it up. just tell us something, because he starts in these elaborate tales. Every time I've read the book, I have wanted to write into that address to get the.
You promised to do that
scene.
last time we talked.
I did actually promise that I would do it. But so when I got to that point, I looked it up on the internet. I cheated, only to find out that for a while, the publisher actually was playing along with it. But of course, the department and the people are all defunct that did that.
Well, yes and no, because my sister actually wrote in. And he mentions this in either the afterword or one of the forewords that they never actually sent the scene. What they sent was a letter.
But right.
Yes. So they did play along to that extent. Yes.
Yeah. So I found a copy of that letter on the internet, and then that letter is printed in almost the same form in, I think, the afterword in the 30th anniversary edition. And at that point, I mean, the letter is basically saying, lawyers from Florin representing the estate of S. Morgenstern have prohibited me from distributing this. Yes. I was like, okay, you're really starting to take this meta thing too far.
Yeah.
And then in the 30th, right, we find out that Morgenstern wrote a sequel, Buttercup's Baby, and William Goldman is all excited to be the guy that translates it, only to find out that the honor has been given to Stephen King.
That was a bizarre twist.
And Stephen King didn't approve of what Morgenstern had done with the original Princess Bride.
What Goldman had done.
I'm sorry, what Goldman had done with the original Princess Bride.
Because in the meta story, Stephen King is actually of Florinese descent.
And it just, and there's so many things that, he talks about, when they're making the movie, he talks about talking with Andre and how Andre had made a pilgrimage to Florin and had seen the museum that had casts of Fezzig's hands and had, these are real people, Fezzig and Vicini. And it's like, how much, I mean, clearly this isn't at all real, but is there a nugget of truth in here? I would much rather have read a story that actually happened about a conversation between him and Andre the Giant. I would much rather have read a story that actually happened between Goldman and Stephen King. And I'm wondering if these almost happened and he's just changed content.
It's fascinating
clues.
because I think he's pretty expert at blending seamlessly between fact and fiction in those meta things, because he does include some true stories. Like when he talks about he wrote Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, and he talks about a line he wanted to include called, I've got 20/20 vision, the rest of the world wears bifocals. And I think that's something he also mentioned in one of his books, Adventures in the Screen Trade, where he talks about his life as a screenwriter. And so that's a true story, and he has it in this foreword. But then he also says that his inspiration for Butch and Sundance jumping off the cliff was the cliffs of insanity in The Princess Bride, which obviously is not true. Yeah, so he does that. He has some true anecdotes in there and some very, very false anecdotes in there. And you have to know. Well, I think you can discount anything that says it takes place in Florin.
Probably so.
Yeah. So
it. The other thing, he in his various forewords and afterwards, he talks repeatedly about his experience writing The Marathon Man.
Yes.
I'm currently reading The Marathon Man.
It's an excellent book.
The foreword to The Marathon Man has got almost the same story. And I don't even remember which one it is, but it's almost word for word an excerpt from the foreword for Princess Bride, or vice versa.
Yes.
So he's recycling his anecdotes between the books.
So that one I think you can count on as true.
Probably.
For the Princess Bride foreword. Yeah.
Yeah. So in my recollection of the last time I read this was I thought that the frame story worked. It wasn't necessarily his best writing, but in a way I'm okay with it not being his best writing because it's just the narrative of reality going on around this lovely fairy tale. In the 30th anniversary edition, I started to really get tired of the meta.
Well, okay, I think we have to separate. So the two forewords are not part of the text proper.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Nor the afterword, nor the letter,
nor Buttercup's Baby.
Yeah.
So the frame story we really should be focusing on is the one that's actually in the original book, which is how William Goldman came to abridge S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure. And And that frame story gets considerably simplified in the movie, and I think all to the better, because William Goldman as a character is kind of an ass. He's off in Hollywood making a movie, and his wife is back home taking care of their kid, and he just rails on his kid for being fat and his wife for being cold. And I don't know how true these things are, but just what an ugly presentation of your family. And he's considering banging this Hollywood starlet who knows who he is while he's trying to find this book, and I get that too. He's trying to lend some urgency to finding this book. It's so important to him to find this book that he turns down a Hollywood starlet, but dude, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, just before that, he's on the phone lying to his wife.
Yes.
I mean, he's at a swimming pool engaging with the starlet, and he's lying to her saying, I'm in a meeting. Yeah. So, I mean, you move from that level of callousness into that whole, no, this is important. I'm going to find a copy of that book.
Yeah. So actually, at the time that I first read this book, I liked that because it made the fairy tale, in a sense, more grown-up. This is a book for grown-ups and not for kids, because that is not a story for kids, you know. And so it made the fairy tale, it aimed at a more adult audience, even though it's the same thing that's in the movie. But also, one of the things I loved as a kid is you just go and you pick a book off the bookshelf in the library, and you were pretty much unsupervised in the fantasy and science fiction section because everyone thought all that stuff was for kids, and most of it was not. And I just remember that kind of delightful sense of you could get anything, in a science fiction novel or a fantasy novel. And a lot of what we get now has been much more dumbed down and segregated by age and streamlined and sanitized. And I think that really, really works for the movie. And I think it's appropriate for the movie, but it was kind of lovely to have that more surprising and adult experience in the book initially. So even though I don't think it works, now I look back at it now and I'm just kind of going, oh, no.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe, if we had been doing this, if podcasting existed 30 years ago and we had been doing it in that society, if our views might not be a little bit less harsh on the... he's, as you said, he's still kind of a dick.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me want to do some research on his actual family and see if, I don't know, though. Yeah. I don't know. He does redeem his son in the end, if that is in fact a real person.
Does that actually happen in the context of the book, or is that in one of the
It happens in Buttercup's baby, that his son loses his baby fat and goes on to be successful and fantastically fit and happily married.
So this is like the 21st chapter in A Clockwork Orange. It was a late add-on that failed to redeem.
Yeah. So another thing about reading the book first is for a long time before the movie came out, it was like being in a secret club. I think I mentioned this already. And that was really nice. And then that goes away when the movie comes out. But I haven't met a lot of people who have actually watched the movie and then gone to the book.
Well, I made that claim, but I don't know. I've got the one yardstick by which I measure the world, and that's the way I do things, right? So clearly everybody else does things the way I do things.
Yeah.
If I find something like that, if I find a movie that I really enjoy and I know it's based on a book, the odds are pretty decent I'm going to seek out the book. It's not a compulsion or anything, but like No Country for Old Men is on my list of things I want to get around to reading.
It was on my list until I realized I just can't abide Cormac McCarthy's writing style. It's like, dude, use some punctuation.
Maybe that'll push it off. Yeah. But I do things like that. I enjoy, and going the other way. If there's a book that I know and a book that I love, and they bring it to the big screen, I'm always very ambivalent about it. There's one side of me that's jumping up and down, going, "Yes, I get to see it," and there's one side of me going, "How are they going to ruin this for me?"
That is exactly it. It's like, I am mandated to see this, but I'm going to regret it.
I've got some words for Peter Jackson.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, we may come around to that in a later edition.
All right. So one of the things that jumped out at me as surprised me was not in the book was the shrieking eels in the bay.
There were no shrieking eels.
There were no shrieking eels. The Vizzini shrieked at one point, but it was just sharks. It was just Sharks don't have the same flavor as the rodents of unusual size. So shrieking eels
there were a couple
much
things you
fit.
can see why they changed in the film. Like it wasn't the lightning sand, it was snow sand.
Yes, lightning sand. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, snow sand didn't ring true, but I couldn't remember what the original was or what the movie was.
Yeah. So there are 2 or 3 little bits like that you can see why they changed it.
Yeah. They also streamlined the third act a bit. There's a whole, I can't even remember now, Fezzik and Inigo going off on some side quests that they just like trimmed out. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about after they've been defeated by the Man in Black, and then they're off wandering about trying to figure out what to do with their lives.
That's in the movie, but it's considerably shortened.
It's basically they show up in Thievesville.
Yeah.
Thieves Quarter?
Thieves Quarter. I think the Thieves Quarter. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, there's a lot more to that in there.
There was another whole section though that's just like, this is not in the movie, and I see now why. This is kind of tedious. Yeah. It wasn't that, but it was somewhere around there, somewhere in that area. I will say this for the book and the movie, as a fan of fight scenes, this is one of the all-time great fight scenes. The duel on the top of the Cliffs of Insanity between the Man in Black and Inigo Montoya. So good, so brilliant. It may be my favorite ever in a body of literature that's not from a play or not from a movie, but from a novel. I think it's probably my favorite fight scene. It's
a really lovely description, and I love they get to Goldman spends so much more time with that, and when they've both switched to their right hand, and the Man in Black is just a little bit better.
Yeah.
In no meaningful way, in no one thing, but just a fraction of just a little bit better, a little nick here, a little trim there, slowly wearing in to go down.
So I didn't go back and watch the movie again, and I don't remember how the movie handles the flashback. Does it with his father?
No, there is no flashback.
There is no flashback. So how do we know about the six-fingered man?
He explains it. So after the Man in Black reaches the top of the Cliff of Insanity, Inigo lets him catch his breath. And during that moment, he shares his backstory.
Okay. Yeah, I think the flashback is very nice in the book. I like that whole story with his father is lovely. Yeah.
Well, and, I love the description. Every day I spend 2 hours squeezing rocks, and then I spend 2 hours being agile, and then I spend he goes through this whole, and, what did he spend 18 years training his body before he finally came back to see the one man who could just tell him if he was ready or not?
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's one of the other great fight scenes in literature is when Inigo finally catches up with Count Rugen, the six-fingered man. Yeah. And the first thing that happens is he loses.
And Count Rugen gives a much better accounting of himself in the book than he did in the film.
He gets a little bit more time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that and Humperdinck both get seriously downgraded in the film. Yeah. The whole Zoo of Death, man, I wish they had found a way to put the Zoo of Death in there. But why would that have made Humperdinck so much more of a powerful character when clearly he's a little whiny toad in the film?
That's a good point. Yeah. He's a formidable adversary in the book, and he's not so much. He's a cartoon villain in the movie.
Yep.
Yeah. Although something I was surprised coming back to the book, because I'm not a huge fan, as much as I enjoy Billy Crystal and it's Carol Kane in the movie.
I actually don't remember.
As Miracle Max and Vera.
And his wife, yeah.
And they're so over the top, but that performance is basically written into the book. Yeah, and that's it. That's how it's written in the book.
The dialogue is spot on for that.
Yeah, the dialogue and the characterization, and he actually talks about that in I think in the Buttercup's baby section, where he says, or does he talk about it in the book itself? Now I can't remember. I'm getting all my meta stuff mixed up.
This is part of the problem.
Where his editor comes to him and says, "These characters are too Jewish," and he says, "Hey, take it up with Morgenstern. You think Morgenstern's not Jewish with a name like Morgenstern?" Yeah, so.
I don't remember where that happens, honestly. I don't know if that's in the book or in one of the add-ons.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And there were a couple of little things that they dropped out of there, but again, for the film, it didn't hurt anything. The fact that he botched the miracle pill and it was only good for 45 minutes instead of an hour.
That would have been a distraction in the movie.
Exactly. Yeah. But it was in the book, it was a lovely little countdown. It's like, he knew he had 17 minutes left. He only had 2.
Yeah. That was fascinating. And that's the kind of thing I think you said you don't like in another discussion we were having where the narrator inserts himself with, is like, who is this person supposed to be? Who are they talking to when they're talking about, he's not gonna, he thought he was going to do this, but he wasn't.
But that's actually Morgenstern inserting himself into the story. You know what? I do remember complaining about that in other contexts, and I loved it in this one.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I had that secret knowledge.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it was okay because it was a meta-narrator inserting it, not a...
So Goldman actually repeats that device in another book that he wrote. He wrote a novel called Heat, which was made into a movie about a bodyguard. And he does a fight scene. It's another one of my favorite fight scenes, actually. He's very good at writing fight scenes. There's a fight scene that takes place in a hotel room, and he breaks it down second by second. And he actually labels the seconds. So in second number 1, these 3 things happen. And then in second number 2, these things happen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, it's like a turn-based RPG or something.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah.
Let's see what I got here. There are always times... Now, the language in this is just delightful.
It is.
All the way through. And there are so many times reading this that I have to just stop and appreciate a sentence or a paragraph that I've just read and not just bulldoze past it. One of the things I really loved was he had the whole parentheticals about when something happened in the history of history.
Yes.
This is before this, but after this.
It is notably before Europe, but after America, which I don't know how that happens.
Sort of thing. One of my absolute favorites. This was after stew, but so was everything. When the first man first clambered from the slime and made his first home on the land, what he had for supper the first night was stew.
One of the things that I highlighted here is this is a sentence worthy of Douglas Adams, which will be relevant in our next episode. But they're talking about the fire swamp. There are 2. The largest one is in Perth, which is impenetrable. And then the one that we're talking about in this book, no one had been able to discover if it was impenetrable or not. I love that idea. It's like, isn't that just impenetrable? Is that not a synonym for impenetrable?
Could well be.
Yeah.
Buttercup, as she's coming into her own, thinking about the beef-witted, feather-brained, rattle-skull, clod-pated, dim-domed, noodle-noggin, sap-headed, lunk-knobbed boys.
Yeah.
That's another Douglas Adams worthiness there.
And I learned a new word reading this book, which was syllabub, which is a malapropism that Buttercup makes talking to Westley at one point. She's like, something, 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 every syllabub. And he knew she meant syllable and not the dessert. And it's like, I had to go and look that up. And it turns out syllabub is actually a dessert. It's a word that's in the dictionary. So
I went right over that.
Yeah.
So not in this one, but in the next book, I realized that I was actually learning words, which we'll talk about shortly. But yeah, I think moving forward, I'm going to start collecting a list. If I have to look a word up as part of reading a book, I'm going to make note of that.
It's a massive advantage of reading on a Kindle. You can just hit highlight, and if it's the Kindle dictionary is not great. There's often words that don't show up in the dictionary, but a lot of them do. So that's nice.
It does indeed make some of that easier.
Yep.
All right.
Anything else on The Princess Bride?
Nothing comes to mind. I feel like we covered it. Again, it's been longer than it should have been since I read this in preparation, and I didn't take all that many notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is it's such a fun read.
It really is. I thoroughly enjoyed returning to this. I can't remember the last time it was when I read it. It may be 20 years ago, because I think I stopped reading the book after the movie came out. I read it several times before the movie came out, and I might have read it once afterwards, but then I just watched the movie now. So it was fun to return to the book.
Yeah, I doubt I've read this. This is probably my 3rd or 4th time. I doubt that I've read it very many times, but I still think it belongs on the favorite list just because of the fondness I have for it. Yeah,
it's iconic. It's just one of those. Yeah.
All right. So what do we have to look forward to our next show?
And next time we are doing a repeat author. We are bringing back Douglas Adams. You had Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as one of your favorite books, and I have picked Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency as one of my favorite books.
Another good page turner there.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.